The desert heat shimmered off the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Sentinel like liquid mercury, distorting the skeletal silhouettes of communications towers that pierced the Afghan sky. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen stepped off the transport helicopter, her olive-drab duffel bag slung over one shoulder, rookie ID badge catching the harsh midday sun. The plastic laminate was so new it still smelled of chemical adhesive, the corner sharp enough to cut paper. Her photo stared back with wide, determined eyes, a face that belonged in a college lecture hall, not a combat zone where the nearest Starbucks was 7,000 miles away. The rotor wash kicked up clouds of fine sand that settled in her teeth, her hair, the creases of her ACUs. She'd been warned about the dust. What no one had prepared her for was the weight of eyes, dozens of them, tracking her movement across the landing zone with the lazy interest of predators sizing up prey. The base stretched before her like a militarized ant farm. Concrete barriers topped with razor wire, prefabricated buildings squatting under the unforgiving sun, soldiers moving with the efficient purpose of worker ants following invisible pheromone trails. "Fresh meat?" someone called from a cluster of soldiers lounging in whatever shade they could find. Laughter followed, the kind that held teeth. Maya adjusted her grip on her duffel and walked toward the administrative building, her boots raising small puffs of dust with each step. The ID badge bounced against her chest, tapping out a nervous rhythm against the buttons of her uniform. Around her neck, on a separate chain, hung a simple silver locket, her grandmother's, worn smooth by decades of worry. Inside was a photo of her parents at their Stanford graduation, both beaming in their caps and gowns, math PhDs who dreamed their daughter would follow in their academic footsteps rather than into the mountains of Afghanistan. The administrative building was a testament to military efficiency. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed with electrical ambition, and the persistent smell of burned coffee mixed with industrial disinfectant. Behind a metal desk sat Corporal Jackson, a man whose face suggested he'd been personally insulted by every piece of paperwork that had ever crossed his path. His nameplate was crooked, as if it had given up trying to maintain military bearing. "Name and purpose?" he said without looking up from his computer screen, fingers pecking at keys with the enthusiasm of someone defusing a bomb. "Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, reporting for assignment to the 75th Communications Squadron." She placed her orders on his desk with military precision, the papers crisp and official. Corporal Jackson glanced at her ID badge, then at his computer screen, then back at her ID badge. His expression shifted through several phases of confusion before settling on practiced bureaucratic indifference. "Say you're supposed to be in the motor pool. Mechanic, right?" "No, sir. Communications. Signals intelligence." He squinted at his screen like it had personally betrayed him. "Computer says motor pool. Computer's never wrong." The way he said it suggested the computer had been wrong at least 17 times that morning, but admitting such heresy would result in immediate court-martial. Maya pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot of her official orders. "Sir, if you look at my MOS code." "Don't need to look at anything, except what's in the system." He handed her a clipboard with forms that looked like they'd been photocopied from photocopies. "Motor pool's building C7. Report to Sergeant Martinez. He'll get you squared away." The motor pool was exactly what the name implied, a collection of vehicles in various states of repair, from pristine Humvees that gleamed in the afternoon sun to mechanical corpses that appeared to be held together with duct tape and optimism. The air tasted of diesel fuel and hydraulic fluid, seasoned with the particular desperation that comes from trying to maintain complex machinery in an environment designed to destroy it. Sergeant Martinez emerged from underneath the hood of an MRAP, like a genie from a very practical lamp. He was covered in grease from fingernails to elbows, his uniform bearing the battle scars of countless mechanical encounters. When he saw Maya, his face went through the same confusion to resignation journey she was beginning to recognize as a base specialty.
"You're not Rodriguez," he said, stating the obvious with the authority of someone who'd spent years mastering the art. "No, Sergeant, I'm Chen. Apparently there's been some mix-up." "There's always a mix-up." He wiped his hands on a rag that appeared to be making the grease problem worse rather than better. "Do you know anything about engines?" "A little. My dad taught me to change oil and check tire pressure." It was a lie. Her father had taught her differential equations and quantum mechanics. The closest she'd come to automotive repair was watching YouTube videos about fixing her laptop's cooling fan. "Good enough. There's a wrench. That's a truck. Make friends." He pointed to a Humvee that looked like it had been through several wars and lost each one decisively. Preparing and narrating this story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya spent the next 4 hours learning that military vehicles were held together by a combination of engineering, profanity, and sheer force of will. The Humvee's engine compartment was a labyrinth of hoses, belts, and mysterious metal objects that seemed to exist solely to cut unwary knuckles. Every bolt was seized with rust, every connection corroded by desert sand that had somehow achieved consciousness and declared war on mechanical systems. Private Williams worked beside her, a kid from Alabama whose drawl could slow down time itself. He had the kind of easy competence with machinery that made Maya feel like she was trying to perform surgery with oven mitts. His hands moved through the engine compartment with the familiarity of someone reading a favorite book. "You're not really a mechanic, are you?" he asked, while they struggled with a particularly stubborn alternator bolt. She paused, wrench in hand. "Is it that obvious? Your hands are too clean, and you keep looking at things like you're trying to solve them with math instead of tools." He grinned, gap-teethed and genuine. "Plus, mechanics don't usually carry government phones with encrypted apps." She glanced down at her phone, which had indeed been buzzing with notifications from applications that definitely weren't standard issue. "Good eye. My daddy taught me to notice things. Said it kept you alive in places like this." He gestured toward the perimeter where guard towers stood sentinel against the desert expanse. "What do you really do?" Before Maya could answer, the base's emergency siren began its mechanical wail. Both soldiers froze, the sound cutting through the diesel-scented air like a blade. Williams dropped his wrench, the metal ringing against concrete. "Incoming," he said. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Maya saw fear flicker across his young face. The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos. Soldiers emerged from buildings like hornets from a disturbed nest, some running toward defensive positions, others herding personnel toward reinforced shelters. Maya followed Williams toward the nearest bunker, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, her first taste of the reality that had been abstract in training, theoretical in briefings. The bunker smelled like concrete dust and human anxiety. Soldiers huddled against reinforced walls, some checking weapons, others staring at nothing with a 1,000-yard gaze that combat veterans wore like a uniform. Maya found herself pressed between Williams and a female soldier whose name tape read Torres. "First time?" Torres asked, noticing Maya's white-knuckled grip on her rifle.
"Yeah, it gets easier. Or you get crazier. Either way, problem solved." Torres had the kind of dark humor that bloomed in places where death was a regular visitor. The all-clear siren sounded 20 minutes later, but the echo of fear lingered in the bunker like smoke. As soldiers filed out, returning to their interrupted routines, Maya noticed something that made her blood freeze. On Torres's belt, partially hidden by her ammunition pouches, was a device Maya recognized. A signal interceptor that belonged to her world, not the world of routine patrols and mechanical repairs. Torres caught her looking and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that held secrets. "Looks like we might have more in common than motor oil," Torres said quietly. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her ID badge, the rookie plastic suddenly feeling like a target painted on her chest. Around the bunker, other soldiers were emerging into daylight, but now Maya was looking at them with different eyes. How many of them were exactly what they seemed? How many, like her, carried identities folded inside identities like Russian dolls? As she walked back toward the motor pool, the locket around her neck caught the light, sending a brief signal across the compound. To most observers, it was just reflected sunlight. But Maya knew better. The locket wasn't just a memento of her grandmother. It was a beacon. And somewhere on this base, someone was listening for its frequency. The question that would haunt her for the remainder of that first day was simple. Who had been expecting her arrival? Maya's quarters were a concrete box, barely large enough for a cot, a wall locker, and the persistent smell of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with the lingering ghosts of previous occupants. She sat on the thin mattress, staring at her rookie ID badge in the yellow light of a single bulb that flickered with electrical uncertainty. The photo looked back at her, still wide-eyed, still determined, but now carrying the weight of questions that had no easy answers. Her laptop hummed to life with a soft electronic whisper.
The screen filled with encrypted communications from Langley, messages that painted a picture far different from the motor pool assignment that had consumed her day. Operation Silent Thunder was proceeding according to schedule. Her cover identity as a communications specialist was intact. What the messages didn't explain was why she was changing oil filters instead of intercepting Taliban communications. A soft knock on her door made her close the laptop with reflexive speed. "Come in." Private Williams peeked his head through the doorway, holding a plate covered with a checkered dish rag. "Thought you might be hungry. Mess hall closes early on Mondays, and you look like you missed dinner." Maya accepted the plate gratefully. Beneath the cloth were 2 slices of pizza that had seen better days, a handful of lukewarm French fries, and an apple that gleamed with cafeteria polish. It was the kind of gesture that restored faith in human kindness. "Thank you. You didn't have to. My mama raised me to look after people who look lost." William settled onto the room's single chair, which creaked under his weight like it was considering retirement. "Besides, figured you might want to talk about whatever it's got you checking your phone every 5 minutes, like you're expecting news that'll change the world." Maya took a bite of pizza that tasted like cardboard, seasoned with optimism. "Just family stuff. My parents worry." "Mine too. Mama sends care packages full of homemade cookies and newspaper clippings about local high school football games, like knowing that Jimmy Henderson threw 3 touchdowns against the Wildcats is going to keep me safe out here." He grinned, but there was homesickness in his eyes. Funny how the people who love us most are the ones who understand us least. The comment hit closer to home than Maya wanted to admit. Her parents had been devastated when she'd chosen military service over graduate school, convinced she was throwing away a brilliant academic future for what her mother called playing soldier. They couldn't understand that some equations were too dangerous to solve in ivory towers, that some problems required solutions written in sand and sweat rather than chalk and theory. "What about you?" she asked. "What brought you here?"
Williams was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. "College wasn't for me. Tried it for 2 years, studying business like my daddy wanted, but I kept feeling like I was sitting on the sidelines while the world burned down around me. Figured if there was gonna be fighting, I'd rather be part of it than pretending it wasn't happening." They talked until nearly midnight, sharing stories that soldiers tell when darkness makes honesty easier. Williams spoke about his small Alabama town where everyone knew everyone else's business 3 generations back. Maya invented a childhood in California that was close enough to truth to feel authentic. Suburban soccer games, piano lessons, parents who pushed achievement like it was a religious obligation. What she didn't tell him was about the sleepless nights spent learning Pashto and Dari, the months of training in facilities that didn't officially exist, or the way her grandmother had looked at her during their last conversation, as if she could see the dangerous path Maya was choosing to walk. The next morning brought another mechanical puzzle in the form of a communications truck that had apparently decided to communicate exclusively through the medium of black smoke. Maya found herself elbow-deep in radio equipment that belonged to a generation of technology her grandmother would have recognized. Vacuum tubes glowed like amber fireflies, and the wiring harness looked like it had been designed by someone with a personal vendetta against efficiency. Sergeant Martinez watched her work with the expression of a man witnessing a miracle performed by someone who didn't realize they were performing one. "How'd you know to check the ground connection first?" Maya paused, realizing she'd diagnosed the problem using knowledge that had nothing to do with motor pool experience. "Lucky guess?" "That's some lucky guess. Most mechanics would have spent 3 hours chasing phantom signals before thinking to check the basics." He made a note on his clipboard. "Are you sure you haven't done this before?" Before Maya could answer, the radio crackled to life with a transmission that made her blood turn to ice water. The voice was speaking Pashto, and while the words were coded, she recognized the syntax patterns that indicated Taliban command and control communications. Someone was coordinating an operation, and they were using frequencies that suggested access to sophisticated equipment. Martinez was too busy celebrating the radio's resurrection to notice Maya's expression. "Outstanding work, Chen.
I'm going to recommend you for additional communications training. We could use someone with your instincts in the command center." Maya nodded and smiled, but her mind was racing through possibilities. The transmission wasn't random Taliban chatter. It was too precise, too organized. Someone with serious resources was operating in their area, and the fact that she'd picked up their signal suggested they were close. Very close. That evening, Maya found Torres in the base library, a room that optimistically contained 3 computers, 24 paperback novels, and a coffee machine that worked on alternate Tuesdays. Torres was reading a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, her finger tracing lines of text with the intensity of someone searching for hidden meanings. "Good book?" asked Maya, settling into the adjacent chair. "Depends on what you're reading it for." Torres closed the book, marking her place with what appeared to be a business card. "If you're looking for the American dream, it's depressing. If you're looking for patterns in communication and symbolism, it's fascinating." Maya felt a familiar chill. Torres was speaking in the kind of careful code that professionals used when they weren't sure who might be listening. "I never thought about it that way."
Most people don't. They see the parties and the cars and miss the surveillance network Fitzgerald was really describing. Torres stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the base perimeter where floodlights were beginning to flicker on. "This place reminds me of West Egg sometimes. Everyone pretending to be something they're not, everyone watching everyone else." Maya joined her at the window. In the dying light, she could see soldiers moving between buildings, each focused on their own mission, unaware of the larger patterns their movements created. "Do you think anyone here is really who they claim to be?" Torres smiled, and for a moment her carefully maintained facade slipped enough to reveal something sharp and calculating underneath. "In my experience, Staff Sergeant, the most dangerous people are the ones who look exactly like what you'd expect them to look like." That night, Maya's encrypted phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. The Taliban communications she'd intercepted weren't random. They were part of a coordinated intelligence operation designed to test base security. Someone was probing their defenses, mapping their response patterns, learning how quickly American forces could react to threats. The message contained a single line that made her heart race. "Asset activation imminent. Maintain cover at all costs." Maya stared at the screen until the words blurred. 3 months of training, 6 months of preparation, and now she was about to discover what she'd really been sent to Afghanistan to do. The motor pool assignment, the rookie ID badge, the carefully constructed identity, all of it was about to be tested in ways that training scenarios could never replicate. She thought about Williams and his gap-toothed grin, about Martinez and his faith in her mechanical intuition, about Torres and her carefully coded literary references. How many of them would still look at her the same way when the truth inevitably surfaced? Outside her window, the base settled into its nighttime rhythm. Guard towers swept the perimeter with searchlights, painting the desert in stark black and white. Somewhere beyond the wire, people were planning violence, with the same methodical precision she learned to apply to preventing it. The thought should have frightened her, but instead, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Langley, the electric thrill of purpose. Her grandmother's locket caught the moonlight, sending a brief signal across the compound. Tomorrow, she suspected, someone would finally answer that signal, and when they did, Staff Sergeant Maya Chen was going to discover just how deep the rabbit hole of her assignment actually went. The rookie ID badge lay on her desk, plastic gleaming under the fluorescent light. By this time tomorrow, Maya realized it might be the last honest thing about her identity that remained visible to the world. The third day brought a sandstorm that turned the sky the color of dried blood and reduced visibility to arm's length. Maya stood in the motor pool, squinting through safety glasses that were already coated with fine grit, trying to install an alternator while the wind howled around them like a living thing with grudges. The storm provided perfect cover for the conversation she'd been dreading since her phone had buzzed with activation orders. Torres appeared through the swirling dust like a ghost materializing from another dimension. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone conducting routine inventory, but her eyes held the sharp focus of a predator selecting prey. "Sergeant Martinez sent me to check on equipment readiness," Torres said, her voice barely audible over the wind.
To anyone watching, it was a normal interaction between two soldiers doing their jobs. "Everything's secure," Maya replied, then added quietly, "though some systems might need recalibration." Torres nodded and moved closer, ostensibly to examine the truck's radio array. "Recalibration can be tricky. Sometimes you think you're tuning one frequency, but you end up broadcasting on entirely different channels." The coded conversation continued as they worked, each woman using the storm as cover to exchange information that would have been impossible to share in clear conditions. Torres was CIA, had been embedded on the base for 8 months, and was running a network of assets that stretched from Kabul to the Pakistan border. Maya was her newest addition to an operation that made the official briefing she'd received look like kindergarten homework.
"The Taliban communications you intercepted yesterday weren't random," Torres explained while pretending to check fluid levels. "Someone's been selling information about our patrol schedules, supply convoys, and personnel movements. We've had 3 ambushes in the past month that were too perfectly timed to be coincidental." Maya felt her stomach drop. Inside information? Has to be. The question is how deep the leak goes. Torres consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. Could be a local national with access to base operations. Could be a soldier with financial problems. Could be someone with ideological motivations we haven't identified. The implications were staggering. Maya had been trained to expect external threats, enemy combatants operating beyond the wire. The possibility that the danger was walking among them, sharing meals in the mess hall, standing watch in the same guard towers, made the familiar base environment feel suddenly hostile. What's my role? Torres glanced around, ensuring they were still alone in the swirling dust. Your cover as a mechanic is perfect. You have access to communications equipment, you can move around the base without raising suspicions, and your technical background makes you ideally suited for the kind of surveillance we need. She handed Maya what appeared to be a standard military maintenance manual. But when Maya flipped through it, she found pages that had been carefully modified. Wiring diagrams had been altered to show connection points for listening devices. Tool troubleshooting procedures had been rewritten to include instructions for accessing encrypted communications channels. Tool lists included equipment that definitely wasn't available in any motor pool. "Study that tonight," Torres said. "Tomorrow, we start hunting." The storm lasted 18 hours, turning the base into an isolation chamber where normal routines ground to a halt. Maya spent the time in her quarters, memorizing the modified manual and thinking about the soldiers she'd met during her brief time on base. Williams, with his easy smile and homesick letters from Alabama. Martinez, with his gruff competence and protective instincts toward his mechanics. Corporal Jackson, whose bureaucratic ineptitude might be genuine confusion or carefully constructed camouflage. When the storm finally cleared, it left behind a base transformed by sand that had infiltrated every surface, every device, every breath. The cleanup took hours, but it provided Maya with the perfect opportunity to begin her real assignment. Moving from vehicle to vehicle with a toolkit that now included surveillance equipment, she began the delicate process of turning the motor pool into an intelligence-gathering operation. The first device went into a Humvee scheduled for patrol duty the following morning. Maya hid the listening equipment inside the radio housing, where it would capture and transmit every conversation that took place within the vehicle. If patrol schedules were being leaked, the conversations of soldiers heading into potentially dangerous territory might reveal how the information was being shared. Installing the second device required more creativity. The communications truck she'd repaired 2 days earlier was used by multiple units, which meant it saw traffic from across the base. Maya built the surveillance equipment into the radio's power supply, where it would be virtually invisible to routine maintenance, but could intercept transmissions from a dozen different frequencies. Private Williams worked beside her, his mechanical intuition making him the perfect cover for her activities.
While he focused on genuine repairs, Maya could install surveillance equipment without appearing to do anything more suspicious than replacing worn components. "You're getting good at this," Williams commented as Maya finished securing a radio panel. "Starting to move like you've been doing it for years instead of days."
Maya felt a pang of guilt. Williams trusted her, had shown her genuine friendship, and she was using that trust to transform him into an unwitting accomplice. Good teachers, she said, which was true, if incomplete. The third device presented a more complex challenge. Torres wanted surveillance coverage of the administrative building where personnel records and operational schedules were processed. The problem was access. Maya had no legitimate reason to spend time in the building, and her mechanical duties kept her confined to the motor pool area. The solution came from an unexpected source: Corporal Jackson's perpetual war against malfunctioning office equipment. The administrative building's communication system was apparently held together by hope, caffeine, and the occasional percussive maintenance technique. When Jackson emerged from the building looking like a man whose printer had personally insulted his mother, Maya saw her opportunity. "Printer problems?" she asked, approaching with a toolkit that now contained solutions to problems far beyond mechanical repair. "Printer, copier, fax machine, and the coffee maker, which I'm pretty sure is communicating with enemy satellites at this point." Jackson wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of toner dust across his brow. "Martinez said you might be able to help with electronics." Maya spent 2 hours in the administrative building, ostensibly fighting a multi-front war against office technology that had apparently achieved consciousness and chosen violence as its primary mode of expression. While she worked, she observed the flow of personnel, the security procedures, and the casual conversations that revealed more about base operations than any official briefing. The printer was indeed possessed by malevolent spirits, but Maya's real focus was the building's communication hub, a room filled with servers, routers, and telecommunications equipment that connected the base to the outside world. Installing surveillance equipment in this environment required surgical precision, but the potential intelligence value was enormous. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the communication room carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd been personally challenged by technology and found wanting. Maya had seen him around the base, but hadn't interacted with him directly. His uniform was impeccable, his bearing crisp, and his eyes held the kind of calculated intelligence that made her instincts twitch with suspicion. "You the miracle worker Jackson called about?" Rodriguez asked, nodding toward the printer that was now producing clean copies instead of abstract art. "Just someone who reads instruction manuals," Maya replied, "though I might be able to help with that tablet if you're having connectivity issues." Rodriguez hesitated, then handed her the device. The screen showed a communication application that Maya didn't recognize, running on frequencies that weren't part of standard military communications. For a brief moment, before the screen timed out, she caught sight of message headers written in what appeared to be Arabic script. "Foreign language support software," Rodriguez explained quickly. "For liaising with Afghan National Army units, the interface is temperamental." Maya nodded and spent several minutes examining the tablet, using the time to memorize everything she could about the mysterious application. When she handed it back, Rodriguez was watching her with the focused attention of someone evaluating a potential threat. "Fixed the connectivity issue," she said. "Should work fine now." "Appreciated," Rodriguez replied, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That evening, Maya's encrypted phone contained a message that made her blood freeze. "Asset compromised, extraction protocols activated, prepare for acceleration." She stared at the screen, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Someone had discovered her real identity, or Torres's network had been penetrated, or the surveillance operation had been detected. Whatever had happened, her carefully constructed cover was beginning to unravel. Maya walked to her window and looked out at the base perimeter, where guard towers stood silent sentinel against the desert night. Somewhere beyond the wire, hostile forces were planning violence based on information supplied by someone she passed in the corridors, someone she'd shared meals with, someone she'd trusted. Tomorrow, she would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect soldiers who might include the person trying to kill them all. The rookie ID badge on her desk caught the fluorescent light, and for the first time since arriving at FOB Sentinel, Maya Chen wondered if she was hunter or prey in the deadly game that was beginning to unfold around her. The explosion that shattered the pre-dawn stillness of FOB Sentinel came from beyond the wire, close enough to rattle windows and far enough away to suggest it wasn't meant for them. Maya jerked awake in her cot, muscle memory already reaching for her rifle before her conscious mind had processed the sound. Outside her window, the eastern sky glowed with an orange light that had nothing to do with sunrise. Emergency sirens wailed their mechanical song as soldiers poured from buildings like water from a broken dam. Maya pulled on her boots and ran toward the motor pool, where vehicles were already being prepped for rapid response. The explosion had targeted a supply convoy returning from a routine mission to a forward checkpoint, a convoy whose route and timing had been classified until 18 hours ago. Sergeant Martinez was orchestrating controlled chaos with the efficiency of a conductor leading a violent symphony. "Chen, get the recovery truck online. We've got vehicles down and wounded coming in." Maya threw herself into the familiar routine of mechanical emergency, but her mind was racing through darker calculations. The explosion attack was too precise, too well-timed to be coincidence. Someone had known exactly when and where to strike for maximum effect. The leak Torres had suspected wasn't just selling information, it was actively facilitating attacks on American forces. The recovery truck's engine turned over with a reluctant growl, diesel smoke billowing from the exhaust stack. Maya was running through pre-deployment checks when Torres appeared at the driver's window, wearing full combat gear and an expression that could cut glass. "Change of plans," Torres said. "You're coming with me." "But the recovery mission is being handled by someone else. We've got bigger problems." Torres climbed into the passenger seat and handed Maya a radio headset. "Patch into frequency 77 Alpha. Time to see what your surveillance equipment picked up." Maya tuned the radio as Torres directed her toward the perimeter gate. The base was transforming around them, routine operations giving way to the organized urgency of a unit preparing for combat. Guard towers were reinforcing their positions, snipers were taking overwatch positions, and the quick reaction force was mustering with the efficient precision of a machine designed for violence. The frequency crackled to life with intercepted communications, voices speaking in Pashto and Dari, coordinating movements with military efficiency. Maya's training kicked in automatically, her mind translating the coded language and tactical references. What she heard made her stomach clench with ice-cold realization. They're not just monitoring our patrols, they're coordinating multiple simultaneous operations. The convoy attack was a diversion. Torres nodded grimly. While we're focused on the recovery operation, they're moving into position for something bigger. The question is what, and the more urgent question is, who gave them the intelligence to make it possible? Their destination was an observation post 3 clicks north of the main base, a collection of reinforced positions overlooking the valley where the convoy had been attacked. As they drove through the gate, Maya caught sight of the smoke plume rising from the impact site, black and oily, the signature of burning vehicles and diesel fuel. The observation post was commanded by Lieutenant Morrison, a young officer whose academy bearing had been seasoned by 6 months of Afghan reality. His uniform was crisp, his equipment maintained with obsessive precision, but his eyes held the hollow focus of someone who'd seen too much death in too short a time. "Status report," Torres said as they approached the command position. 3 vehicles hit by IED, followed by small arms fire from prepared positions, Morrison replied. 2 KIA, 5 wounded, 1 missing. The attackers knew exactly where to position for maximum effect and had withdrawal routes planned to avoid our response. Maya studied the tactical map Morrison had spread across a field table. The attack site was marked with red pins, but what caught her attention were the blue markers indicating friendly force positions. Someone had provided the attackers with detailed knowledge of American defensive positions, response protocols, and likely reaction patterns.
"Sir," Maya said, "has this map been distributed to other units?" Morrison glanced at Torres, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Standard tactical briefings. Company commanders, platoon leaders, specialist units. Probably 30 people have seen various versions of this intelligence." Torres pulled Maya aside, speaking in the low, urgent tone of someone sharing dangerous secrets. "The surveillance equipment you installed has been recording for 72 hours. If there's a leak, we might have captured it, but analyzing the data requires equipment we don't have in the field." "What about the tablet Rodriguez was carrying yesterday, the one with the foreign language software?" Torres went very still. "What tablet?" Maya described her encounter with Rodriguez, the mysterious communication application, and the brief glimpse of Arabic script she had seen before the screen timed out. Torres listened with the intensity of someone hearing confirmation of their worst fears. "Rodriguez isn't cleared for foreign language applications. His job is base communications, strictly internal systems." Torres was already reaching for her radio. "If he's running unauthorized software, especially anything that interfaces with external networks." The radio crackled with incoming transmission before Torres could complete her call. The voice was speaking English with an American accent, but the words turned Maya's blood to ice water. "Overwatch, this is Raven. Package is delivered. Initiating Phase 2. Torres grabbed the radio handset. All stations, this is command. Raven is not an authorized call sign. I repeat, Raven is not authorized." The response came from Lieutenant Morrison, whose voice carried barely controlled panic. "Command, we have movement in Sector 7 and 9. Multiple contacts. Coordinated advance. They're using our own tactical frequencies." Maya watched through binoculars as the disaster unfolded in the valley below. Afghan fighters were advancing on the convoy recovery operation with tactics that mirrored American military doctrine. They moved with the precision of soldiers who had been trained by professionals, using communication protocols that suggested access to sophisticated equipment and detailed knowledge of their opponent's capabilities. "They're not just intercepting our communications," Maya realized. "Someone's training them to fight like us." Torres was coordinating the response with the efficiency of someone who'd prepared for this scenario, but Maya could see the calculations running behind her eyes. The attack was too sophisticated, too well coordinated to be the work of typical Taliban fighters. This required resources, training, and most dangerously, inside information that could only have come from someone with high-level access. Maya's encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. "Abort operation. Extraction in progress. Trust no one." She showed the message to Torres, who read it twice before her expression hardened into something that could have been carved from granite. "Too late for extraction. We're committed now." The battle in the valley was intensifying, American forces establishing defensive positions, while Afghan fighters pressed their attack with tactics that were disturbingly familiar. Maya found herself studying the enemy's movement patterns, recognizing elements of training she'd received at Fort Bragg and Langley. Whoever was coordinating the attack understood American military doctrine well enough to exploit its weaknesses. "Torres," Maya said quietly, "what if the leak isn't just someone selling information? What if someone's actively training them to fight us?" Before Torres could answer, Maya's radio headset crackled with a transmission that made both women freeze. "All stations, this is Rodriguez. I have eyes on the target. Engaging now." Maya grabbed her binoculars and scanned the observation post's perimeter. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was moving through the defensive positions with purposeful precision, but he wasn't heading toward the enemy. He was positioning himself for a shot at Lieutenant Morrison's command post. "He's not engaging the enemy," Maya whispered. "He's targeting our own people." Torres was already moving, her sidearm clearing its holster with practiced speed. Maya followed, her mind racing through tactical calculations and the horrible realization that they were about to engage an American soldier who had chosen to betray everything his uniform represented. The confrontation came suddenly, violently, and with the stark clarity that only life-or-death moments can provide.
Rodriguez had positioned himself behind a defensive barrier, his rifle trained on Morrison's position, when Torres's challenge cut through the morning air like a blade. "Rodriguez, stand down!" He spun toward them, his face cycling through surprise, calculation, and finally a cold resignation that Maya recognized from training scenarios. This was the moment when cover stories collapsed and true loyalties were revealed. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," Rodriguez said, keeping his rifle trained on Morrison while positioning himself to maintain visual contact with Torres and Maya. His voice carried the calm professionalism of someone who'd prepared for this confrontation. "Took you longer than I expected." Torres kept her weapon steady, but Maya could see the tactical problem they faced. Rodriguez had chosen his position well. He could eliminate Morrison and still have cover for engaging them. Any movement would trigger a gunfight that would end with American soldiers killing each other while the real enemy pressed their attack in the valley below. "How long?" Torres asked, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal and professional fury. 18 months, since before I arrived on base. You CIA types always think in terms of recent recruitment, compromised loyalties, financial pressure. You never consider that some of us chose our side long before we put on the uniform." Maya felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. Rodriguez hadn't been turned by enemy agents. He'd been planted from the beginning, a long-term asset positioned to provide intelligence and coordinate attacks when the timing was optimal. "The tablet," Maya said. "You weren't running translation software. You were coordinating attacks." "Very good, Sergeant Chen. Or should I say, Agent Chen." Rodriguez's eyes carried the keen intelligence of someone who'd been quietly observing and analyzing her from the moment she arrived.
Did you really think your cover identity would fool someone with access to personnel databases and communication intercepts? Torres shifted slightly, trying to improve her firing angle without triggering Rodriguez into action. What's the endgame? You can't seriously think this attack will succeed. This attack, Rodriguez laughed, a sound devoid of humor. This attack is just the opening move. While you're focused on the convoy recovery and dealing with me, my associates are implementing Phase 3 of an operation that's been months in the planning. Maya's radio headset crackled with incoming transmissions, multiple stations reporting contact, defensive positions under pressure, coordination breaking down as communications became unreliable. The attack in the valley was escalating beyond anything they'd prepared for, and now she understood why. Rodriguez had been feeding intelligence to enemy forces for over a year, providing them with detailed knowledge of American tactics, equipment, and personnel. Phase 3, Torres demanded. Your base defense plan assumes attacks from outside the wire. But what happens when the attack comes from inside? When someone with access to armory codes, defensive positions, and command protocols decides to open the door for his friends? The implication hit Maya like a physical blow. While they'd been focused on the external attack, Rodriguez's network had been preparing to assault the base from within. The explosion at dawn, the convoy ambush, the sophisticated tactics, all of it was designed to draw attention and resources away from FOB Sentinel itself. Maya's encrypted phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Base penetration imminent, multiple hostiles inside the perimeter, authorization code Broken Arrow. Broken Arrow. Maya's training kicked in with automatic precision. The authorization code meant nuclear weapons or classified materials were at risk of capture by hostile forces. FOB Sentinel didn't have nuclear weapons, but it did have something else that could change the balance of power in Afghanistan: the complete database of American intelligence assets operating throughout the region. "The server room," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You're after the intelligence database." Rodriguez nodded, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the weapons trained on him. 18 months of work to get access to that room. Names, locations, operational procedures for every CIA asset from Kabul to Karachi. Do you have any idea what that information is worth to the people I work for? Torres was speaking rapidly into her radio, coordinating the base's response to the internal threat, but Maya could see the tactical nightmare they faced. If Rodriguez's associates had already penetrated the base perimeter, if they had inside knowledge of defensive positions and security procedures, the skeleton crew left behind to guard the base might not be able to stop them. "How many?" Torres demanded. "Enough," Rodriguez replied, "and they know exactly where to go and how to get there." Maya made a decision that would haunt her for years afterward. Instead of maintaining her position in the standoff, she turned and ran toward the observation post's communication equipment. If Rodriguez's people were inside the base, if they were moving on the intelligence database, she had to warn someone who could coordinate an effective response. "Chen!" Torres shouted, but Maya was already diving for the radio array. The shot came from Rodriguez's position, the sharp crack of an M4 rifle echoing across the observation post. Maya felt the bullet pass close enough to her head to disturb her hair, but she reached the radio without stopping. Her fingers flew across the controls, switching to the emergency frequency reserved for base-wide alerts. All stations, this is Watchdog. We have internal compromise. Repeat, internal compromise. Multiple hostiles inside perimeter, moving on server room Delta. Authorization code, Broken Arrow. Broken Arrow. Maya's training kicked in with automatic precision. The authorization code meant nuclear weapons or classified materials were at risk of capture by hostile forces. FOB Sentinel didn't have nuclear weapons, but it did have something else that could change the balance of power in Afghanistan: the complete database of American intelligence assets operating throughout the region. "The server room," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You're after the intelligence database." Rodriguez nodded, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the weapons trained on him. 18 months of work to get access to that room. Names, locations, operational procedures for every CIA asset from Kabul to Karachi. "Do you have any idea what that information is worth to the people I work for?" Torres was speaking rapidly into her radio, coordinating the base's response to the internal threat, but Maya could see the tactical nightmare they faced. If Rodriguez's associates had already penetrated the base perimeter, if they had inside knowledge of defensive positions and security procedures, the skeleton crew left behind to guard the base might not be able to stop them. "How many?" Torres demanded. "Enough," Rodriguez replied, "and they know exactly where to go and how to get there."
Behind her, Torres and Rodriguez were engaged in a deadly game of tactical positioning, each trying to gain advantage without triggering a gunfight that would eliminate both of them. Maya could hear their careful movements, the soft scrape of equipment against concrete, the controlled breathing of professionals preparing for violence. Maya's phone buzzed again. "Authentication required. State your real designation." She hesitated for only a moment before keying the response that would blow her cover identity forever. Tier 1 Operator, Special Activities Division, Authentication Code Blackbird 77. The reply came instantly. "Authentication confirmed. You have operational command. Coordinate base defense." Maya stared at the screen, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. In the space of 5 minutes, she'd gone from undercover intelligence operative to the senior officer responsible for defending an entire military base against an attack that had been planned for over a year. She turned back toward Torres and Rodriguez, who had frozen in their tactical dance. Both were staring at her with expressions that mixed shock, realization, and in Rodriguez's case, something that might have been respect. "Tier 1, Torres said softly. Maya nodded, her rookie ID badge feeling like a costume prop she could finally discard. "Special Activities Division, deep cover insertion to identify and neutralize the intelligence leak." She looked directly at Rodriguez. "Mission accomplished." Rodriguez lowered his rifle slightly, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine surprise. "They sent a Tier 1 operator to play mechanic in a motor pool?" "They sent someone who could identify and stop you before you destroyed 18 months of intelligence work and got a lot of good soldiers killed. Though I have to admit, the mechanic thing was harder than the counterintelligence work." Torres was already moving, her weapon trained on Rodriguez with renewed confidence. "Stand down, Sergeant. It's over." But Rodriguez was shaking his head, his expression shifting back to cold professionalism. "No, Agent Torres, it's just beginning. You've identified me, but you haven't stopped the operation. My people are already inside your base, and they know exactly what they're looking for." Maya's radio crackled with another transmission from Base Command. "Watchdog, we have multiple explosions in Server Complex Delta. An unknown number of hostiles have penetrated the inner perimeter, requesting immediate assistance." She looked out at the valley where the convoy recovery operation was still underway, then back at Torres and Rodriguez, and finally at the radio that connected her to a base full of soldiers whose lives now depended on decisions she was about to make. The rookie ID badge caught the morning light one last time before Maya removed it from her uniform and let it fall to the concrete. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, motor pool mechanic, had served her purpose. What happened next would require someone with different skills, different authority, and a very different kind of training. Maya's transformation from undercover operative to battlefield commander happened in the time it took her to key her radio and speak words that would echo through the corridors of FOB Sentinel for years to come. "All stations, this is Tier 1 actual. I have operational command. Implement Defense Protocol 7 immediately."
The response was instant and overwhelming. Radio frequencies came alive with acknowledgments, status reports, and the controlled urgency of soldiers who had just learned their base was under attack from within. Maya found herself coordinating a defense against an enemy who knew their positions, their procedures, and their weaknesses with the intimacy of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. Torres moved to secure Rodriguez, while Maya established command and control from the observation post's communication array. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was defending an American military base, using skills learned in facilities that officially didn't exist, against an enemy who had been trained using American military doctrine. "Perimeter teams, report status," Maya ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded operations in places where failure meant more than career consequences. The reports painted a picture of coordinated chaos. 6 breaches along the wire, positioned to divide defensive attention, attackers wearing American uniforms and carrying U.S. equipment, moving with knowledge of guard rotations and blind spots that could only have come from extensive inside intelligence. Most critically, a team of 8 hostiles had penetrated the inner perimeter and was moving on the server complex where months of intelligence data was stored. Maya studied the tactical display Torres had spread across the command table, her mind calculating angles of attack, response times, and the devastating mathematics of asymmetric warfare. The enemy had chosen their timing perfectly. Most of the base's combat power was committed to the convoy recovery operation, leaving a skeleton crew to defend against an attack they hadn't seen coming. "Torres, what's the fastest route from here to Server Complex Delta?" Torres traced a path across the map with her finger. "The direct route is 8 minutes by vehicle, but it takes us through 3 areas where they've established overwatch positions. Alternate route adds 4 minutes but keeps us in covered terrain." Maya shook her head. 4 minutes might as well be 4 hours. That's enough time for them to download everything and disappear. She keyed her radio again. "Base Command, this is Tier 1 actual. I need the current status on the server complex." The response was grim. "Tier 1, we have explosions in building C-12. An unknown number of hostiles have penetrated the server room. Security forces are taking heavy casualties. Estimate 6 minutes until complete data compromise." 6 minutes. Maya's training had prepared her for impossible situations, but this one required choices that would haunt her regardless of the outcome. Every second spent planning was a second the enemy could use to complete their mission. But moving without adequate intelligence would likely result in her walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. Rodriguez, now secured with zip ties and under Torres's guard, spoke from his position on the floor. "You're too late, Agent Chen. My people have been planning this operation for 8 months. They know exactly how your security forces will respond, exactly what routes you'll take, exactly how long they have to complete the mission." Maya looked down at him, seeing not just a traitor,
but a professional who had outmaneuvered the American intelligence apparatus for over a year. "What's your extraction plan?" Rodriguez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Extraction? Who said anything about extraction? This is a one-way mission, Agent. My people aren't planning to leave." The implication hit Maya like a physical blow. If Rodriguez's team wasn't planning to extract, if they were prepared to die to complete their mission, then they had resources and motivation that went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. This was something bigger, something that justified suicide missions and months of patient preparation. Maya's encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message. "Tier 1 actual. This is Langley. Satellite imagery shows additional hostile forces massing 2 clicks south of your position. Estimate company strength reinforcement moving toward base perimeter. You have been authorized to use any means necessary to prevent data compromise." Any means necessary. Maya understood the euphemism. She had been given authority to call in airstrikes, artillery support, or any other asset that could prevent the intelligence database from falling into enemy hands, even if it meant destroying part of the base and potentially killing American soldiers in the process.
"Torres," Maya said quietly, "I need you to coordinate the response to the perimeter breaches. Use whatever forces we have left to buy time. What about you?" Maya was already moving toward the vehicles parked behind the observation post. "I'm going to the server complex. If Rodriguez's people want that data badly enough to die for it, then it's worth dying to protect." Torres caught her arm as she passed. "Maya, you can't go alone. It's a suicide mission." "Not if I'm fast enough and lucky enough." Maya checked her rifle and secured her equipment with the efficient movements of someone who had prepared for this moment in a dozen different training scenarios. "Besides, I've got one advantage Rodriguez's people don't know about." "What's that?" Maya smiled, and for the first time since her arrival at FOB Sentinel, it was the smile of a predator who had found her prey. "They think I'm a mechanic who got lucky. They have no idea what a Tier 1 operator can do when she stops pretending to be someone else." The drive to the server complex took Maya through the heart of a base under siege. Smoke rose from multiple locations where explosive breaches had created gaps in the perimeter. American soldiers were establishing defensive positions with the disciplined efficiency of troops who had trained for this scenario. But Maya could see the confusion in their movements. They were defending against an enemy who understood their doctrine better than they understood themselves. Maya's radio crackled with status updates that painted an increasingly desperate picture. The convoy recovery operation was still ongoing, tying up the base's quick reaction force. Perimeter defenses were holding but taking heavy casualties. Most critically, the team inside the server complex had successfully breached the main security vault and was in the process of accessing the intelligence database. Maya parked her vehicle 2 blocks from the server complex and approached on foot, using skills that had been honed in training facilities where the consequences of detection were academic rather than lethal. The building ahead was a reinforced concrete structure designed to withstand everything from mortar attacks to electromagnetic pulse weapons. It had not been designed to withstand attack from someone with legitimate access and intimate knowledge of its security systems. The approach was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Maya's instincts, sharpened by months of training and years of experience, screamed warnings that she forced herself to ignore. Rodriguez's team would have posted sentries, established overlapping fields of fire, prepared for exactly the kind of response she was mounting. But they would have prepared for a response by base security forces, not by someone with her particular set of skills. Maya reached the building's perimeter and immediately understood why the approach had been so quiet. Rodriguez's team hadn't posted external sentries because they didn't need them. The building's own security system had been turned against the defenders, with surveillance cameras providing early warning and electronic locks preventing reinforcement from reaching the server room. Maya's phone buzzed with another priority message. Tier 1, satellite imagery shows hostile reinforcements 30 minutes out.
Whatever you're going to do it now. 30 minutes. Maya studied the building ahead, calculating approach routes, breach points, and the tactical nightmare of assaulting a position held by people who had spent months learning every detail of its defenses. This was the kind of mission that usually required a full team, extensive planning, and resources she didn't have. But Maya had something Rodriguez's team didn't expect: the fury of someone who had spent 3 days watching good soldiers die because of information sold by a traitor who wore the same uniform they did.
The locket inside her body armor, checked her rifle one final time, and began moving toward the building with the fluid precision of a predator closing in for the kill. The next 20 minutes would determine whether 18 months of intelligence work and the lives of dozens of American soldiers had been sacrificed for nothing, or whether a mechanic who wasn't really a mechanic could accomplish what an entire base's worth of trained soldiers had failed to do. Maya keyed her radio one last time before beginning her assault. "All stations, this is Tier 1 Actual. I'm going dark. If you don't hear from me in 20 minutes, implement Broken Arrow protocols and level the building." The response came from Base Command, carrying the weight of command decisions that would haunt whoever made them. Tier 1, acknowledged. 20 minutes on my mark. Good hunting. Maya switched off her radio and disappeared into the shadows surrounding the server complex. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, the confused mechanic with the rookie ID badge, was gone forever. What emerged from the shadows was something far more dangerous: a Tier 1 operator with 18 months of anger and the skills to make it count. The assault on the server complex began with silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. Maya moved through the building's lower level like smoke given form, her training transforming corridors she'd walked during routine inspections into a three-dimensional tactical map where every shadow held potential threat and every sound carried intelligence about enemy positions. Rodriguez's team had established themselves in the main server room with professional competence, but they'd made the critical error of assuming their opposition would follow standard military doctrine. They'd prepared for a frontal assault by base security forces, not for infiltration by someone trained in facilities where the rules of engagement were written in disappearing ink. Maya's phone vibrated with a text message that made her blood freeze. "Perimeter reinforcements arriving ahead of schedule. You have 10 minutes before the base is overrun." 10 minutes. Maya looked at the locked door separating her from an unknown number of hostiles, calculated the time required for a methodical approach, and made the kind of decision that defined the difference between operators and soldiers. She was going to have to improvise. The explosive breach was small, precise, and completely unexpected. Maya had used training charges designed for lock destruction rather than structural demolition, creating just enough chaos to disrupt the enemy's defensive preparations without bringing down the building around them. She went through the opening before the smoke cleared, moving with the fluid aggression of someone for whom violence was a carefully studied art form. Rodriguez's team was professionally trained and well-equipped, but they'd been caught in the fundamental tactical error of focusing on their primary mission rather than security. The 4 men in the server room were clustered around computer terminals, their weapons within reach but not immediately ready, their attention divided between data extraction and the sudden realization that their carefully planned operation had just become a close-quarters battle.
Maya's rifle spoke with the authority of extensive training and desperate necessity. The first target went down before he could reach his weapon. The second managed to return fire, but his shots went wide, striking server racks and filling the air with the electric smell of destroyed electronics. The third and fourth hostiles took cover behind equipment designed to withstand electromagnetic pulse, but not armor-piercing rounds, fired by someone who had spent months learning to shoot under stress. The firefight lasted 37 seconds and ended with Maya standing among the wreckage of destroyed computer equipment and 4 bodies that represented the end of an intelligence operation that had taken 18 months to plan and execute. She keyed her radio with hands that were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Base Command, this is Tier 1 Actual. The server complex is secure. The hostile team neutralized. The response carried relief that was audible across the static. Tier 1 acknowledged. Outstanding work. Be advised, perimeter teams report all breaches contained. Hostile reinforcements withdrawing. Maya surveyed the damaged server room, calculating the intelligence cost of the operation. Several server racks had been destroyed in the firefight, representing the loss of operational data that couldn't be replaced. But the core intelligence database remained intact, protected by redundant systems and her timely intervention. Her encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message. Mission accomplished. Extraction authorized. Well done. Maya stared at the screen, understanding that her official assignment was complete, but knowing that the real work was just beginning. Rodriguez's network had been neutralized, but the damage they'd caused would ripple through intelligence operations for months. Trust would have to be rebuilt, security procedures would have to be enhanced, and everyone who had worked with Rodriguez would have to be investigated and cleared. The helicopter that arrived 3 hours later carried a team from Langley, who moved with the efficient urgency of people cleaning up an operation that had gone simultaneously better and worse than anyone had planned. Maya briefed them in clinical detail, providing the kind of comprehensive after-action report that would be studied in training facilities for years to come. Outstanding work, Agent Chen, said the team leader, a man whose face belonged on recruiting posters, but whose eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone who'd spent decades in the shadow world. Your cover identity was perfect. No one suspected until you chose to reveal yourself. Some people suspected. The good ones always do. The debriefing took place in a secure facility where the walls held secrets like other buildings held shadows. Maya described Rodriguez's network, the sophistication of their planning, and the chilling professionalism of people willing to die for intelligence that could reshape the balance of power in Afghanistan. The concerning element, she told the debriefers, is the level of training Rodriguez's people displayed. This wasn't amateur hour. Someone invested serious resources in teaching them to fight like us. The implications were discussed in sterile conference rooms where careers were made and ended with equal bureaucratic efficiency. Rodriguez hadn't been a lone wolf or a simple turncoat. He'd been part of a systematic effort to penetrate American intelligence operations using methods that mirrored their own recruitment and training procedures. Maya's official commendation was classified at a level that meant she could never discuss it with anyone who hadn't signed documents that made disclosure a federal crime. The words exceptional courage, tactical brilliance, and saved countless lives would remain buried in files that wouldn't be declassified for 50 years.
But the real recognition came from sources that mattered more than official records. Private Williams sent her a letter 6 months later, written in the careful handwriting of someone for whom writing didn't come easily. He'd been promoted to specialist and was training new soldiers in the motor pool, teaching them that mechanical knowledge was important, but situational awareness might keep them alive. Sergeant Martinez wrote that the motor pool had been renamed the Chen Maintenance Bay in recognition of her service, though the official records would forever show that Staff Sergeant Maya Chen had been killed in action during the defense of FOB Sentinel. It was a small fiction that protected operational security while honoring someone who had given everything for people she'd known for less than a week. Torres remained in Afghanistan for another 8 months, running operations that built on the intelligence Maya's intervention had preserved. Her reports, heavily redacted in the versions Maya was authorized to read, described a network of assets whose continued operation had been made possible by preventing the compromise of their identities. 2 years later, Maya stood in a nondescript office building in Arlington, Virginia, briefing a new class of Tier 1 candidates on the complexities of deep cover operations. The students were young, eager, and possessed of the kind of confidence that came from extensive training and limited real-world experience. The most dangerous moment in any undercover operation, she told them, isn't when you're discovered. It's when you have to decide whether to maintain your cover or blow it to save lives. That decision will define not just the success of your mission, but who you are as an operator and as a human being. One of the students, a young woman whose file indicated exceptional promise, raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you prepare for that kind of decision?" Maya thought about a rookie ID badge catching the morning light, about the weight of responsibility settling on shoulders that had been prepared for everything except the moment when pretense became impossible. You don't prepare for it. You just hope that when the moment comes, you make the choice you can live with. After the briefing, Maya walked to the memorial wall where the names of fallen operators were etched in black granite. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen wasn't listed. Officially, she'd never existed in any capacity that would justify inclusion. But Maya knew the wall represented more than just the names carved into its surface. It represented every choice made in shadow, every sacrifice offered without recognition, every moment when someone chose duty over safety. Her grandmother's locket caught the light as she stood before the wall, sending a brief signal across the memorial garden. It was a signal no one was listening for anymore, a frequency that carried only memory and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Maya's current assignment involved training the next generation of operators who would face increasingly sophisticated threats from adversaries who studied American methods with the dedication of doctoral students. The world was becoming more complex, more connected, and more dangerous with each passing year, requiring people willing to become anyone except themselves in service of something larger than personal ambition. 5 years later, the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing was closed to the public, held in a secure room where senators with appropriate clearances received briefings on operations they could never discuss with their constituents. Maya sat at the witness table, no longer the uncertain young operative who had arrived at FOB Sentinel with a rookie ID badge and a story about mechanical aptitude. "Agent Chen," said the committee chairwoman, "your report describes a systematic effort by hostile forces to penetrate American intelligence operations using our own training methods against us. How do we defend against threats that mirrored our own capabilities?" Maya considered the question, thinking about Rodriguez and his professional competence, about an enemy that had learned to fight like Americans better than many Americans fought. "Senator, the threat isn't that our adversaries are learning our methods. The threat is that we're becoming predictable in how we apply them. Security doesn't come from having better techniques. It comes from being unpredictable enough that technique becomes secondary to adaptability."
The questions continued for 3 hours, covering operational details that would shape intelligence policy for the next decade. Maya's recommendations, filtered through legislative process and bureaucratic implementation, would eventually result in training programs that emphasized cognitive flexibility over procedural adherence, human judgment over technological solutions. After the hearing, Maya walked through Arlington National Cemetery, where row upon row of white headstones stood Sentinel, over the remains of people who had chosen service over self-interest. The setting sun painted the markers in shades of gold and shadow, creating a landscape that spoke to sacrifice without requiring words. Her phone buzzed with a message from Torres, now running a training facility in North Carolina, where the next generation of intelligence officers learned to navigate the gray spaces between truth and necessity. The message contained a single photo. Private Williams, now Sergeant Williams, teaching a class of young soldiers how to maintain communications equipment in hostile environments. Maya smiled, remembering the gap-toothed kid from Alabama who had shown her kindness when she'd been pretending to be someone she wasn't. Some things, she reflected, remained unchanged by the passage of time and the accumulation of secrets. Human decency still mattered. Trust was still the most valuable currency in relationships that defined life and death. And sometimes, the most important victories were the ones that preserved ordinary moments of connection between people who had every reason to be suspicious of each other. 10 years later, the memorial service for Sergeant Martinez was held on a crisp autumn morning at Arlington National Cemetery, attended by soldiers who had served under his command and civilians who had been touched by his dedication to the young people he'd trained. Maya stood among the mourners, wearing the dress blues that marked her current rank and position in a bureaucracy that officially didn't acknowledge her existence. Martinez had died at home in Texas, surrounded by family and the kind of peace that comes from a life spent in service to others. His wife spoke about a man who had returned from 3 combat tours with stories about soldiers who had served under his command, including a young woman who had impressed him with her mechanical intuition and quiet competence. He used to say that Maya Chen was the best natural mechanic he'd ever seen, said she had a gift for making broken things work again. Maya touched her grandmother's locket, feeling the weight of identity and the complexity of truth. Martinez had known her as a soldier struggling with equipment she didn't understand, not as an operative trained in surveillance and counterintelligence. But his assessment hadn't been wrong. She had possessed a gift for making broken things work again. She just applied that gift to different kinds of problems than he'd imagined. The reception after the service was held in a community center where photographs displayed Martinez's career spanning 30 years of military service. Maya found herself studying pictures of the motor pool at FOB Sentinel, recognizing faces that had aged and uniforms that had been replaced by civilian clothes or more recent military assignments. Maya. The voice behind her was familiar, carrying the Alabama drawl that had once helped her feel less isolated, in a place where everyone seemed to know secrets she was still learning. She turned to find Williams, now wearing the chevrons of Master Sergeant and the bearing of someone who had spent years teaching young soldiers how to survive in places where mistakes were measured in lives rather than grades. His gap-toothed grin had been replaced by dental work, but his eyes still held the genuine warmth that had made him trustworthy when trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Billy Williams," she said, accepting his handshake with the careful formality that marked interactions between people who shared classified history. "I heard you're running training programs now. Fort Gordon, teaching communications to kids who think warfare is a video game and mechanics is something you pay other people to worry about." His smile carried the rueful affection of someone who had dedicated his career to bridging the gap between theoretical
knowledge and practical survival. Been thinking about that summer at Sentinel a lot lately. About how you showed up knowing nothing about engines, but somehow always seemed to know exactly what was wrong with them. Maya nodded, choosing her words with the precision that came from years of navigating conversations where too much honesty could compromise operational security. Sometimes intuition matters more than training. Sometimes, Williams agreed. And sometimes people aren't exactly who they seem to be, but they're exactly who they need to be when it matters most. They talked for another hour, sharing memories that had been carefully edited to remove details that remained classified a decade after the events had occurred. Williams spoke about soldiers he'd trained who had gone on to serve in conflicts that had grown more complex and more dangerous with each passing year. Maya described her current work in training and policy development, using euphemisms that suggested importance without revealing specifics. As the reception wound down, Williams handed Maya a photograph she recognized, the motor pool at FOB Sentinel, with herself and Williams working on the communications truck that had become her introduction to the technical complexities of modern warfare. "Thought you might want this. Martinez kept it in his office for years. Said it reminded him that the best soldiers were the ones who cared more about solving problems than following procedures." Maya studied the photograph, seeing herself as Williams had known her, a young soldier struggling with equipment that was more sophisticated than her cover story had prepared her to handle. The image captured a moment of genuine connection between people who trusted each other despite knowing almost nothing about each other's real background or mission. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than the photograph. Williams nodded, understanding that some conversations carried meanings that couldn't be spoken aloud. "Take care of yourself, Maya. And if you ever decide you want to teach young soldiers how to think instead of just following orders, there's always a place for you at Gordon." 15 years later. The Strategic Intelligence Assessment briefing was held in a conference room where the future of American security policy was shaped by people whose names would never appear in history books. Maya, now carrying the title of Deputy Director for Operations, sat at the head of a table surrounded by analysts, operatives, and policymakers whose collective experience spanned 6 decades of intelligence work. The Rodriguez case study represents a fundamental shift in how we must approach counterintelligence operations. The traditional model assumes that threats come from outside our organization and work their way in. Rodriguez demonstrates what happens when the threat is embedded from the beginning, when someone spends years learning our methods well enough to turn them against us. The PowerPoint presentation displayed organizational charts, communication flows, and decision trees that reduced human betrayal to abstract problems that could be solved through better procedures and enhanced training. But Maya knew the reality was more complex than any flowchart could capture. The most effective defense against the Rodriguez threat model isn't better screening or enhanced security procedures. It's creating an organizational culture where people like Private Williams and Sergeant Martinez feel empowered to trust their instincts when something doesn't seem right. One of the younger analysts raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do we balance that kind of intuitive assessment with operational security requirements?" Maya thought about Torres and her literary references, about Williams and his mechanical intuition, about Martinez and his protective instincts toward the young soldiers under his command. We train people to trust their judgment while giving them the tools to act on their suspicions in ways that enhance rather than compromise operational security.
The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering budget allocations, personnel assignments, and policy recommendations that would shape intelligence operations for the next fiscal year. Maya's recommendations, filtered through legislative approval and bureaucratic implementation, would eventually result in training programs that emphasized human judgment over technological solutions, community building over individual achievement. After the meeting, Maya returned to her office and opened a file that she reviewed every year on the anniversary of the FOB Sentinel operation. The file contained after-action reports, personnel assessments, and photographs that captured a moment when everything she thought she knew about herself and her mission had been tested by circumstances that training had never adequately prepared her to face. The rookie ID badge was preserved in plastic, along with a handwritten note from Martinez recommending her for advanced communications training, and a commendation letter from Base Command recognizing her role in defending the installation against hostile penetration. None of the documents told the complete story, but together they formed a narrative that spoke to the complexity of identity and the weight of choices made under pressure. Maya's current assignment involved preparing for threats that were becoming more sophisticated and more personal with each passing year.
The world had changed dramatically since Rodriguez's network had been dismantled, but the fundamental challenge remained the same: how to defend against adversaries who understood American methods well enough to exploit their weaknesses. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Torres, who was now running counterintelligence operations in Eastern Europe. New Rodriguez-style network detected in Prague. Same methodology, same patience, same long-term planning. They're learning from what we learned. Maya stared at the message, understanding that the victory at FOB Sentinel had been tactical rather than strategic. Rodriguez's network had been neutralized, but the model heat represented, deep penetration, patient development, systematic exploitation of organizational vulnerabilities, had been studied, refined, and replicated by adversaries who viewed American intelligence capabilities as puzzles to be solved rather than forces to be feared. She walked to her office window, looking out at the Virginia landscape where the next generation of intelligence officers were learning to navigate challenges that grew more complex with each year of technological advancement and geopolitical instability. Somewhere in that landscape, young people were preparing for assignments that would test their judgment, their courage, and their ability to make impossible choices under circumstances that training could only approximate. Maya's grandmother's locket caught the afternoon light, sending a brief signal across the parking lot below. It was a signal that had once carried operational significance, a frequency that had connected her to networks and identities that existed in the shadows between official acknowledgement and necessary denial. Now, it was simply a reminder of the woman who had taught her that some fights were worth everything you had to give, even when the cost couldn't be calculated in advance. 20 years later. The retirement ceremony for Deputy Director Maya Chen was held in a secure facility where the attendance list remained classified and the speeches contained euphemisms for achievements that would never be publicly acknowledged. Maya stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included operators she'd trained, analysts she'd mentored, and policymakers whose decisions had been shaped by lessons learned in places like FOB Sentinel. 25 years ago, she told the assembled group, I arrived at a forward operating base in Afghanistan carrying a rookie ID badge and a story about mechanical aptitude that fooled exactly no one who mattered. What I learned during those first few days shaped everything that came after, not just my career, but my understanding of what it means to serve something larger than personal ambition. She spoke about the complexity of identity in a profession where truth was often the first casualty of operational necessity, about the weight of decisions made in isolation, and about the importance of remembering that behind every classified file and operational report were human beings whose lives hung in the balance. The greatest threat to American security isn't sophisticated technology or well-funded adversaries. It's the possibility that we'll become so focused on procedures and protocols that we forget to trust the judgment of people like Private Williams, who noticed things
that didn't add up, or Sergeant Martinez, who created an environment where young soldiers felt safe enough to ask questions that mattered. The audience included representatives from every major intelligence agency, military commanders whose operations had been shaped by policies Maya had helped develop, and civilian leaders whose understanding of modern threats had been informed by lessons learned in places where failure was measured in lives rather than budget allocations. After the ceremony, Maya found herself in a reception area where photographs displayed highlights from a career that had spanned 6 presidential administrations and conflicts on 4 continents. She studied images of training facilities, operational planning sessions, and award ceremonies that captured moments of professional achievement while carefully avoiding details that remained classified decades after the events had occurred. "Ma'am?" The voice belonged to a young woman whose uniform indicated recent graduation from the Intelligence Officer Training Program. Her face held the kind of eager determination that Maya remembered from her own early assignments, when everything seemed possible and the complexity of real-world operations was still theoretical rather than personal. "Yes?" I wanted to thank you for the Rodriguez case study. It's required reading in advanced counterintelligence training. The young officer paused, choosing her words with the precision that came from understanding that careers could be shaped by casual comments. I'm deploying to Afghanistan next month. Any advice for someone who's about to discover whether training matches reality? Maya looked at her, seeing herself 25 years earlier. Confident, prepared, and completely unprepared for the moment when cover stories would collapse and true identity would be revealed through choices made under pressure. Trust your instincts, Maya said. Learn from everyone around you, especially the people who seem to have nothing to teach you. And remember that the most important victories are often the ones that preserve ordinary moments of connection between people who have every reason to be suspicious of each other. The young officer nodded, making mental notes that would either save her life or get her killed, depending on how well she learned to apply abstract principles to concrete situations where hesitation was often the difference between success and catastrophic failure. As the reception wound down, Maya walked to the memorial garden, where the names of fallen operators were etched in black granite. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen still wasn't listed. Officially, she'd never existed in any capacity that would justify inclusion. But Maya knew the wall represented more than just the names carved into its surface. It represented every choice made in shadow, every sacrifice offered without recognition, every moment when someone chose duty over safety. Her grandmother's locket caught the setting sun, sending a final signal across the memorial garden. It was a signal that carried 25 years of operational experience, classified achievements that would remain buried in files for decades, and the accumulated weight of choices that had defined not just a career, but a life spent in service to something larger than personal ambition. Maya removed the locket and held it for a moment, remembering the woman who had taught her that some fights were worth everything you had to give. Then she placed it at the base of the memorial wall, where it would catch the light each morning and send signals that no one was listening for anymore. Frequencies that carried only memory and the hope that somewhere young people were learning to make impossible choices with wisdom that training could only approximate. 30 years later, the university lecture hall was filled with students whose understanding of modern warfare came from news reports, documentaries, and academic theories that reduced complex human choices to case studies in strategic decision-making. Professor Maya Chen stood at the podium, looking out at faces that belonged in classrooms rather than combat zones. Young people who would shape policy and public opinion without ever experiencing the weight of decisions made under fire. The most dangerous assumption in modern strategic thinking, she told her students, is that conflicts can be understood through the lens of rational actors making calculated decisions based on complete information. The reality is that wars are fought by human beings operating with incomplete intelligence, under extreme pressure, in situations where the right choice often requires abandoning everything you've been trained to do.
She spoke about the complexity of identity in conflicts where enemies and allies could be distinguished only through choices revealed under pressure, about the importance of human judgment in an era of technological sophistication, and about the weight of decisions that would never be subjected to public scrutiny or academic analysis. One student, whose raised hand indicated the kind of confidence that came from extensive theoretical preparation and limited real-world experience, asked the question Maya had been expecting. Professor, how do we prepare military and intelligence personnel for situations where standard procedures don't apply? Maya thought about a rookie ID badge catching the morning light, about Torres and her literary references,
about Williams and his mechanical intuition, about Martinez and his protective instincts toward young soldiers who deserved better than they usually received. "You don't prepare them for specific situations," Maya replied. "You prepare them to think clearly under pressure, to trust their judgment when procedures fail, and to remember that the most important victories are often the ones that preserve human connections in circumstances designed to destroy them." The lecture continued for 90 minutes, covering strategic theory, operational planning, and policy implementation through examples that had been carefully scrubbed of classified details while retaining the human elements that made abstract concepts relevant to practical decision-making. After class, Maya returned to her office and opened a file that she reviewed every year on the anniversary of the FOB Sentinel operation. The file contained documents that captured a moment when everything she thought she knew about herself and her mission had been tested by circumstances that training had never adequately prepared her to face. The rookie ID badge was still preserved in plastic, along with photographs that showed a young woman pretending to be someone she wasn't while learning to become someone she'd never imagined she could be. The images captured moments of genuine connection between people who had trusted each other despite knowing almost nothing about each other's real background or mission. Maya's current assignment involved teaching the next generation of policymakers and strategic thinkers, young people who would shape America's response to threats that were becoming more sophisticated and more personal with each passing year. The world had changed dramatically since Rodriguez's network had been dismantled. But the fundamental challenge remained the same: how to defend against adversaries who understood American methods well enough to exploit their weaknesses. Her phone buzzed with a message from Williams, now retired and running a veterans assistance program in Alabama. "Teaching young mechanics to trust their instincts. Thinking about that summer at Sentinel. Hope you're still making broken things work." Maya smiled, remembering the gap-toothed kid who had shown her kindness when she'd been pretending to be someone she wasn't. Some things, she reflected, remained unchanged by the passage of time and the accumulation of secrets. Human decency still mattered. Trust was still the most valuable currency in relationships that defined life and death. And sometimes, the most important victories were the ones that preserved ordinary moments of connection between people who had every reason to be suspicious of each other.
She walked to her office window, looking out at a campus where young people were preparing for careers in government, military service, and intelligence work. Somewhere among those students were future operators who would face assignments that would test their judgment, their courage, and their ability to make impossible choices under circumstances that academic preparation could only approximate. Maya's grandmother's locket was no longer around her neck. It rested at the base of a memorial wall in Virginia, where it caught the morning light and sent signals that carried memory rather than operational significance. But the lessons it represented remained: that some fights were worth everything you had to give, that identity was more complex than any cover story could capture, and that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who looked exactly like the people you'd been trained to trust. The rookie ID badge from FOB Sentinel was framed on her office wall, a reminder of the moment when she'd stopped pretending to be someone else and started becoming the person her choices had revealed her to be. Below it was a photograph of the motor pool, where she learned that mechanical knowledge was less important than the ability to see patterns that others missed, to trust instincts that training had taught her to question, and to make connections that preserved humanity in circumstances designed to destroy it. As the sun set over the university campus, Maya prepared her notes for the next day's lecture on crisis decision-making, using examples that had been carefully edited to protect operational security while preserving the human elements that made strategic theory relevant to practical application. Tomorrow's students would learn about the Rodriguez case through academic analysis rather than personal experience, but they would carry forward lessons that might someday help them navigate the gray spaces between truth and necessity. The final lesson, the one that couldn't be captured in case studies or theoretical frameworks, was the simplest and most important. In a profession where identity was fluid and truth was often the first casualty of operational necessity, the most valuable asset was the ability to remain human while doing inhuman things in service of something larger than personal ambition.
Maya touched the space where her grandmother's locket had once rested, sending a signal that existed only in memory and hope. The hope that somewhere, young people were learning to make impossible choices with wisdom that training could only approximate, courage that came from conviction rather than procedure, and humanity that survived even in the shadows where their work would forever remain. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.